husband of 11 years originally told police his wife went to the store in the middle of the night to get medicine. Her body was found just off the shoulder of Highway 75 a few hours later.
This became an enraged, brutal murder that's unthinkable. And so I want to make it perfectly clear that both of them are equally liable for this horrendous act.
It broke my heart that he hurt that woman. You know, he was my son. I didn't think that he would do something like that. It hurt for years. It didn't go away.
There were 3 people out there that night, and only one of them is still alive. And so how do I know I'm getting the whole story from this guy? I think everybody has things about themselves that they don't want people to know.
I feel like I'm more than just my crime, you know? I mean, that was a horrible time. It was a dark period in my life. And, you know, a lot of people are hurt. But I feel like I just wanted people to see me and have a chance to, you know, see me as more than just something they read on the internet.
Prosecutors say Stemple was a husband who first cheated on his wife, then killed her for money, nearly $1 million in life insurance, and because he had a girlfriend. They say he offered his girlfriend's cousin, Terry Hunt, $30,000 to help beat Tricia Stemple, then run over her with a truck and make it look like a hit-and-run accident.
Prosecutors say this case was one of the worst crimes they've ever seen.
You know, if I could take that moment back, you know, I mean, it would, I can't say that my life would have been better or that I wouldn't went along to prison, but, you know, Tricia would still be alive. Her family wouldn't be missing someone that they loved. You know, and I would say that it was a horrible crime. There's no getting around it. You know, and I'm not saying that I don't deserve to come to prison, you know, and do a lot of time. I don't deny that or dispute it. But I would say that, you know, that while I participated in that, you know, that's not who I am. You know, it's hard to, you know, tell people, hey, you can trust me now. You know, I mean, that was then, you know, and I've changed. I'm not, and I don't think anybody's the same as they were when they was 16. Sean Stemple was my cousin's boyfriend. You know, and I got to kind of looking up to him. He seemed like a upstanding guy. I mean, he had a lot of the things that I wanted, like he had a house, you know, he had a car with a stereo system. You know, he seemed like he had things together. Just seemed like a good person. You know, I didn't find out till, you know, shortly after I met him that he was actually married. One day, I don't know if he came over to my house, I talked to him and I asked him, I was looking for a job. He said, well, what would you do for $50,000? And I was like, anything, you know, $16,000, $50,000 sound like couple million. And then he asked me to help him kill his wife. I don't remember exactly what I said to him, but I agreed with it. I agreed to do it, you know, I remember that.
Were you scared?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you know, I mean, who talks about killing somebody and just blinded by greed and, you know, I didn't really think about backing out, you know, once I told him yes. I don't pretend to say that, you know, that I didn't know right from wrong. I knew it was wrong, you know, that was a hard time of my life. He was to tell her that the truck had broken down because we'd had the hood propped up to make it look like it was broke down on the side of the road. And he wanted me in the bushes waiting. He pulls up and he has her hold the flashlight in front of on the hood. And while he gets in the driver's seat and starts the truck up, you know, and the signal was, you know, when he revved the engine. That's when I ran up the small hill and hit her with the bat twice.
Did it knock her out?
No. The first one didn't, and the second one knocked her to her knees. I remember that.
Sean takes the bat from you.
Right.
And he continues to hit her. How are you feeling in this moment? I think you must have been scared out of your mind.
I was. I remember crawling up in the passenger side of the seat after that. And in my mind, all I see is it plays over and over again is seeing him doing that. And that's what haunts me more than anything. There's no quitting at that point.
And then what happened?
You know, I understand that this is important, but I also understand that Trisha's family's gonna watch this. And I don't want them to have to relive the details. You know, they know them, I've told them.
Yeah. That's a picture of the crime scene with her body there. Crazy. In doing a job like this, you end up having things in your mind you can't unthink. And you know, I certainly, to this day, it's been 28 years, 27 years, you know, I still have those in my mind. I do think about her. She was, you know, she was living her life, and she thought, you know, obviously nothing, you don't ever fathom anything like this happening to you. And she was, I mean, from what I was told by everybody, she was a great person. And she was brutally murdered. At the time, on the media, it was being displayed as a traffic accident. But I would say we believed from the outset that it was a murder. Yeah. That's the baseball bat that was used in the death of Trish Stemple. Sean Stemple went to the house, picked her up under the premise that his car had broken down. He got her out to that
to the scene. Once she got out of the car, Terry began to beat her with a bat, and they had a bat that was wrapped in saran wrap as part of their premeditation, and he began to beat on Tricia. And at some point, Sean became dissatisfied with that and took the bat himself and beat his wife probably at least 30 times.
I think it was survival she was fighting. I mean, you know, you don't know what somebody would be thinking. I'm sure she was thinking why, but, you know, I think she was fighting. And ultimately, she's run over by the truck. This is the truck. Yeah, that is the truck that was used. Wish you could see that right bumper. There was actually her handprint was on the right front bumper, visible. So that goes to her fighting. She had crawled, I think, probably a couple feet. I mean, again, I mean, she was just a fighter. And they drove over her again. And, I mean, I get choked up about it, but the severity of her injuries were gruesome. It was some things that are unimaginable, why a human being would do that to another. She was just a good person, and the way she died was horrible. I think at some point he just decided that the only way he was going to be able to deal with that was to get rid of his wife. We further developed that there was a insurance policy of around $1 million. We came to the determination that Sean Stemple was the person that did it, and we ultimately came to the conclusion that Terry Hunt had helped him. And so I want to make it perfectly clear that both of them are equally liable, responsible for this horrendous act. And there's no way around that. I mean, what Terry Hunt did was evil. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that. I mean, he was sentenced to life for his evil acts, you know, and I feel comfortable in that.
That's Terry. Yeah, he looks worried to me, and he should be worried. Yeah, he had just, you know, been involved in something very, very, very bad.
And what did you think when you heard that your son had been arrested for murder?
Well, I was hoping it wasn't true, of course. I was devastated. I was devastated my son was involved in it. It was a very vicious, bloody crime. No doubt about it. I didn't think that I ever brought him up that way. I never did. It was the most brutalest crime that there was in Oklahoma. Well, Terry's pretty smart, pretty normal. We did a little fishing, we did a little camping, we had a great time as far as I know. He didn't start getting off the, you know, till he's around 14. You become the company that you keep. It says it in the Bible. He did drugs and do whatever he wanted to do, and that got Terry off the, way off the path of doing right. I'd take him to school and he'd beat me home. We didn't live that far from the school, but if we dropped him off, we figured that he'd go. So we got him in the car, took him, dropped him off, and when we got home, there he was, So we called the school. They sent the policeman out there, and the policeman told Terry, you got a choice here. You can either go to school or you can go downtown and live off the street, whatever you want to do. He said, I'll live off the street. So they took him downtown and dropped him off. One thing that he did that, scary to me, he took my gun.
When he left?
Yeah. I knew it was getting worse, but there was nothing I could do about it. He refused to come home, and he got in with Stemples, and and that woman got killed,
Well, I remember the day after, I came back and I forced myself to go to sleep. And I remember the day after, I'd seen it on the news. I'd looked out, I'd constantly be looking out the window, thinking they're coming, and there was just, and I would just throw myself on the bed crying, it's like it scarred me, it was, there wasn't no, like celebration or nothing crazy like that. It bothered me, as it slowly, sunk in that this was, we'd killed somebody. We did the absolute worst thing you can do as a human being. Whether you get caught or not, you don't get away with murder. It haunts you. It's something that's internal, and there ain't no punishment externally that anybody could do to you, even life in prison or the death penalty that can be any worse than what you do to yourself in your own mind. So I'm walking around with the torment and worried about going to jail. We sat up in the interrogation room, me and this cop, for, I don't know, seemed like hours, but it was probably maybe an hour or so. When the detective come in and let me talk to my lawyer was like, man, he's pretty much, they got you. And I said, I'll tell him.
The prosecution's case or your story calculated what must have been 30 baseball bat blows to her body. That how many you think there were?
In my mind, I play it, and I play that part over and over again. And I can't pinpoint the exact number of it, but I know that it was quite a lot, you know what I mean? Yeah.
And you hit her twice, and then
Right.
you had to stop, is that right?
Right. When I was at the preliminary hearing, when you get in them situations, you want it to be over with. You want to get it over with as quick as possible. You know, and after the preliminary hearing, I laid in my rack and I thought about it, you know, and I remembered that, you know, I mean, I didn't forget I did that, but I knew I didn't tell him that at the preliminary hearing. And, you know, I knew that that was, you know, something that happened and that needed to be told. And so the next time I talked to the lawyers, you know, I told them that, you know, I mean, that didn't help my case, you know, in fact, that made me more culpable than what I was prior.
Because at trial, you say that you ran her over and that Sean also ran her over, is that correct?
Right. I can recall, I think he rolled over trying to drive over her head. I remember that.
Okay. And then and then you roll over her.
Right, over her chest.
You roll over her chest. And then she gets up and walks from there. She crawls to the side of the road.
Yes. I didn't know what to do. I was just kind of, I don't want to say autopilot, but he was directing it and he's telling me, you know, what to do.
And what's he telling you to do?
Well, like he'd tell me to, like, you know, help him move her and, you know.
So would you say that he's in charge at this moment?
Oh yeah, he was definitely in charge.
What do you think your punishment should be for this crime?
I think I'm living my punishment. You know, I think. But I mean, and while I hope, you know, to get out, you know, I'd like to, you know, get out and do something. I know I owe a big debt to, you know, to a lot of people, to society, and I'd like to do something to make my life count, you know, because in prison, you're kind of, it's like everything's on pause. I've been in almost 30 years and, you know, I don't know if I'm any closer to getting out than I was, you know, 30 years ago.
All right.
You could just tell me your name.
My name's Maureen Hunt.
And how are you related to Terry Hunt?
I'm Terry's wife. In the state of Oklahoma, you can throw a rock and hit somebody who has a loved one that's incarcerated. And so I have some really good friends whose son was incarcerated. And so I was introduced to Terry. This is a guy who I think that you would get along with. You know, he's a great guy. And so we started writing. He's a great writer. And so we wrote back and forth a lot. And, you know, it was like 6 months before he actually told me about his crime. He wrote me a letter and said, I want to go ahead and, you know, talk to you about my crime. Because I think we were both really enjoying each other's company, and he didn't want to get too far into it, even as a friend, and then tell me what happened for me to turn around and say, I'm out. And so I did what everybody else did, and I got online, and same thing, Terry Lee Hunt, you know, and it pops up. And saw that headline. I thought, yeah, this is not your average murder. This is bad. Yeah, that's probably the first headline that comes up when you Google him. Teen beat woman to death on Tulsa Road. I have friends who've lived here for a long time and they remember this crime. It was notorious. And it made me really sad because I thought, this isn't the guy I've gotten to know at all. I could not wrap my head around it, to be honest. But according to Terry, teen beat woman to death is not accurate at all. Terry did not beat her to death with a bat. He started to, you know, he hit her twice and then he told Sean, I can't do it, I can't do it. There were 3 people out there that night, and only one of them is still alive. And Sean was executed in 2012. How do I know I'm getting the whole story from this guy? And so I took a year to make sure that he was exactly who he said he was, and not who the internet said he was. I confronted him a lot. I'd go to visit with my list of questions and ask him because I had to know the answers, and it was difficult. I was ashamed of what he did. But I feel like the person that Terry was then was a completely different person than I know now, 28 years later. People are led, and 16-year-olds are even easier to lead. And Sean knew that. He knew exactly what he was doing when he was grooming Terry. Terry was manipulated by Sean. I believe in him so much. I have so much hope, and, you know, hopefully the world will see him for who he is.
Stemples made him do it. He was forced to do what he had to do.
You think he was forced?
Oh yeah, he was forced. I don't think that he was brought up, you know, to do that, and I don't think that he had the courage to do that. He was pressured. You know, he was Stemples, the guy that hired him to help him kill his wife. He had threatened him about me and my wife and my other son. Said, if you don't go through this, I'm gonna kill them. And that's how he got involved deeper. I wish he'd have told me. You know what I mean? He was took advantage of because he was a young kid, and this guy was a coach. You know, if you got a coach, he can manipulate kids. That's what he does. Now he's paid what he did. You know, now he's looking for a chance to get out there, and that's what he deserves. He deserves one more chance.
And that's Sean Stemple. I really don't think much of this guy. I mean, he's pathetic. I think he's a very good manipulator. I think that's what he thrived with. He was very accomplished in his profession as a soccer coach, so he had a little bit of a reputation, I believe, for having some charisma, and people liked him, and I think that he used that to gain whatever he wanted. I think that's just a part of his personality. He just seemed very controlling and manipulating, and I mean, exactly what he was. Terry was so young. He's just a kid. Terry was very vulnerable, and as any predator does, they're going to pick somebody they can manipulate, and that's exactly what happened here. He was ripe for the picking because of his age and his problems he was having. But he was just as guilty and just as involved as Sean Stemple. plain and simple. In fact, there was another attempt prior. My understanding was a couple weeks prior to the actual murder, they had made a tentative date to commit the crime, and they ended up not being able to do that because they could not get Tricia to go along with it. She wasn't feeling well. I believe she was ill at the time.
Yeah, me and Nate were out there waiting, and she was supposed to show up. And then when we seen the car pull up, it was Sean. You know, and he was saying that she was sick and couldn't come.
And so they had to change plans. Terry Hunt knew what he was doing, had many times to say no, and he chose not to.
So you had 2 weeks to think about it. He made the decision not to show up.
Yeah, I mean, I did have the 2 weeks, and I've heard the detective say that, you know, this guy had 2 weeks to change his mind. And during those 2 weeks, you know, I thought that there would always be something that would come up, you know, that this, like, I never really believed that this would ever happen. It didn't become real to me until it started happening. Until, you know, they pulled up and she was there. Just looking back, if I could take that back, that would, I know that her family misses her. And I'd hope that they know that I know that I've hurt them. And I'd hope they know that I'm sorry.
Why should people believe you now? Is there anything you can say to?
That's a tough question because, you know, I mean, people, I mean, I understand I'm in prison, you know, I'm in prison for murder, and, you know, I've tried to educate myself. You know, I got my GED when I first come to prison. You know, I've earned an associate's degree. I'm almost got my bachelor's degree. I've talked to, you know, young kids, you know, kids they brought into the prison. And I've tried to use my time as wisely as possible and try to contribute wherever I can. I would like to think that, you know, I've done enough to show that I'm better, you know, that I've improved myself, that I've grown up, I've matured, you know, and that I have something to offer. You know, if they let me out, then I have something that I can give back.
I think essentially you're asking people to kind of make a leap of faith.
I mean, that's what parole boards do every time they recommend somebody for parole, because I mean, at the end of the day, you know, only you know what you think and what you're gonna do.
When Terry proposed to me, I knew for the rest of my life I was going to be the wife of a murderer, even after he was out of prison. And I had to face him face to face and look at him in the eye and reconcile that in my mind. And that took a while, you know? It took a while for me to get past that, because that's not the man that I know now. I have no reason not to believe him. And I do feel like he is remorseful, and I do feel like he's compassionate and a good person, and someone that I love so much and believe in so much that I did end up marrying them. I could have just turned my back on him like everybody else has. Especially last year when he didn't make parole. That was, oh God, that was one of the hardest days of my life. I could have just turned my back and said, I can't do this anymore. And he was terrified that I was gonna walk away.
Did you think about walking away?
No, I never thought about it because walking away would have been abandoning the best thing that ever happened to me.
He said, well, what would you do for $50,000? And I was like, anything, you know, $50,000 sound like a couple million. I don't pretend to say that, you know, that I didn't know right from wrong. I knew it was wrong, you know, and
that's where the greed comes in.
that's where the greed comes in.
I can see it upsets you.
Hey, you know, that was a hard time of my life.
It's hard to see that. I've never seen him cry. The day that he called me after the parole board denied him, he called me on the phone and I had to say, they said no. And he cried and I had to hear him cry. And all he would say is, I'm sorry I can't come home to you. I'm sorry I can't come home to you. And that's the only time I've ever heard him cry. And that was tough. It was really hard. 28 years later, he still has nightmares about it. It's not something he'll ever forget. The crime will never change. You can't go back and erase that. That's history. Yeah, that's history. And if he could go back and change it, of course he would. I don't look at him and think, this guy's a killer. He's grown into the kind of man who deserves a second chance.
I believe he's entitled to have a consideration to be let out, so that I thought maybe my unique involvement might help. You know, my oldest son is an addict and is sober 10 years now, but that's definitely changed me for the better. It's made me a better person, it's made me a better lawyer, and it's made me more empathetic. Terry Hunt was very, very young when he was sentenced to life. He did a horrible act, despicable, no excuse. And in the same breath, he has done the time. And he hasn't just done the time, he's done the work. He's very accomplished within the prison system as being a productive member of that system. If the system doesn't look at that and say, well, maybe we need to consider letting him out, then I don't know what the system's for. I don't know what else he can do to better himself or put himself in a position to be eligible to get out with a life sentence. I say all this with the understanding that the family of Tricia Stemple are in agreement with this. I would never go against their wishes.
You're sure you wouldn't harm anyone again? No one has to worry about you hurting someone?
Oh, of course not. I would never, I mean, that's the furthest thing from my mind. You know, I mean, that doesn't no good. Violence is failure. Violence is, you know, there's too much of it in this world. And I know that, you know, that's what people fear is, you know, somebody getting out of prison and harming somebody. That's why it's so hard to get out of prison.
You ever think about Tricia?
Yeah. I mean, she, yeah, I think about her and I pray that, you know, she would understand that I'm sorry that I ever thought that any amount of money was worth taking anybody's life. You know, I'm sorry that I didn't take them 2 weeks and go to the police. You know, that I could have stopped all this. You know, that I was the one person that could have, you know, changed the whole outcome, and I didn't. I failed. You know,
It started on a freezing night in February 1999. Snowflakes were falling thick over rural Ohio, the kind that muffles every sound and swallows every trace of movement. Out here, surrounded by open fields and miles of silence, people said you could hear your own heartbeat echo. But that night, something else broke the silence, the kind of sound that doesn't belong in a place like this. A scream, then another, and then nothing. When deputies arrived hours later, the street looked ordinary. A porch light burned through the mist, a yellow glow flickering through the frost. Inside the house, it was as if time had stopped mid-motion. A kettle still on the stove, a chair knocked over, 2 bodies lying side by side on the kitchen floor, husband and wife, both shot at close range. No signs of robbery, no forced entry. Whoever came here, they were invited in. The victims were Thomas and Rachel Miller, both in their early 40s, both lifelong residents of the small town of Copley, Ohio. He was a mechanic, quiet, respected. She worked part-time at the local library, known for her warm smile and the way she remembered everyone's name. Their deaths made no sense. This was a town where people still left their doors unlocked, where gossip spread faster than fear, but that night everything changed. The investigation began immediately, but it was as if the crime itself had been swallowed by the cold. Detectives combed the scene for clues, but the evidence refused to speak. No fingerprints on the gun, no strange footprints in the snow, just a trail of blood that stopped abruptly at the back door, leading nowhere. The only thing missing was Thomas's pickup truck, found 2 days later in an abandoned field 5 miles out of town, wiped clean. Inside, police found a single cigarette butt. They sent it for DNA testing, hoping for a breakthrough. But this was 1999. Technology was still slow, and leads were scarce. In the weeks that followed, suspicion moved like a storm cloud across the town. Some whispered it was a break-in gone wrong. Others thought it was personal. Too deliberate, too calm to be random. Rachel's co-workers mentioned she'd seemed nervous the week before, checking over her shoulder, jumping at sudden sounds. But when asked why, she just said, "It's nothing." Just old memories. Detectives looked into everyone they could, family, friends, neighbors, even an old boyfriend Rachel hadn't spoken to in 20 years. They questioned them all, but nothing fit. Every timeline broke apart under scrutiny. Every alibi held. The town's sense of safety began to unravel. Then came the funerals side by side under the same gray sky. Hundreds attended, but no one spoke much. Everyone felt watched. The killer could have been standing right there among them. Months passed. Then, years. The case grew cold. The file thickened with dead ends, reports, interviews, tips that led nowhere. The cigarette butt sat sealed in an evidence bag labeled unknown male DNA. The detectives who had once sworn to solve it retired one by one, carrying the failure with them like a ghost. But in a town like Copley, ghosts don't stay buried. Every so often, new detectives would reopen the file, hoping that fresh eyes might see what others missed. They would read the same statements, trace the same photographs, walk through the same house that had been repainted and sold 3 times since. Always the same conclusion: no suspect, no motive, no justice. Until the fall of 2023, 24 years later. Detective Sarah Calloway had been with the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation for over a decade, specializing in cold cases. She wasn't old enough to remember the original murders, but she'd heard the whispers. She knew the legend, the couple who died with no answers. the story that parents told to warn their kids about locking their doors. When she reopened the Miller file, it was out of instinct, not expectation. The evidence was old, degraded, but technology had changed. She sent the cigarette butt for advanced DNA analysis using a new genetic genealogy database. Within weeks, the results came back a partial match to a man living 2 counties away, a relative, the name Michael Trent. It wasn't a perfect match, but it was enough to narrow the field. Investigators began to build a family tree, tracing every branch until one name stood out. Daniel Trent, age 47, living just 20 miles from the original crime scene. A quiet man, no criminal record, worked as a delivery driver, married, 2 kids, ordinary. But when police dug deeper, they found that Daniel had grown up just a few blocks from the Millers. His father used to work at the same garage as Thomas Miller. And suddenly that long-forgotten cigarette didn't feel so random anymore. Detective Calloway requested a DNA sample from Daniel Trent. He agreed, calm and cooperative. The results came back within a week, a 99.8% match to the DNA found on the cigarette butt in the victim's truck. For the first time in nearly 25 years, they had a suspect. When detectives arrived at his home to question him, Daniel didn't seem surprised. He listened quietly, hands folded, eyes fixed on the table. Then, after a long silence, he said something that made everyone in the room stop breathing. "I knew this day would come," he whispered, "but you don't know the whole story." He didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't resist, just started talking. His voice was low, almost steady, like he'd been rehearsing it for decades. He said he hadn't meant for it to happen, that he'd gone to see Thomas that night to settle something old. He didn't say what, just that words turned to shouting. Shouting turned to panic, and panic turned to blood. When asked about Rachel, his face changed. His voice cracked. "She wasn't supposed to be there," he said. "She tried to stop me. I just reacted." The detectives let him speak. Every sentence sounded like confession and denial all at once. He talked about guilt, about dreams that never stopped, about driving home with blood on his hands and praying for the snow to bury every trace. He said he'd spent years watching the news, waiting for the story to resurface, waiting for someone to knock on his door. But when they asked him why he finally confessed, why now, after all this time, his answer chilled them. "Because the truth doesn't die," he said softly. "It just waits until you're too tired to keep it down." As he spoke, the town began to stir again, whispers of justice, shock, disbelief. The name Daniel Trent spread through Copley like wildfire. Some remembered him as a quiet kid who kept to himself. Others swore they'd seen something strange in his eyes, even back then. When the sheriff announced the arrest, reporters flooded the small town. Cameras lined the courthouse steps. After 24 years, he said the Miller double homicide has been solved. But Detective Calloway wasn't convinced. Something about Daniel's story didn't add up. His tone, his details, the way he avoided certain questions. It felt too clean, like a script. The cigarette linked him to the scene, yes, but there was no proof he fired the gun. No murder weapon had ever been recovered. No clear motive had been established. And that phrase he kept repeating, "You don't know the whole story." What story was that? That night, Calloway sat alone in her car outside the station, the confession tape playing back through her headphones. She closed her eyes and listened again to the pauses, the hesitation, the tiny tremor in his voice when he mentioned Rachel. There was something there, a secret buried beneath the words. Maybe he wasn't lying, maybe he was confessing to something else entirely. In small towns like this, truth and guilt often share the same face, and as the first snow of the season began to fall again, just like it had in 1999, it felt as if the past wasn't finished speaking. Because sometimes even when a case is solved, nothing is truly over. And in Copley, Ohio, the ghosts of that winter night were only beginning to whisper again. The tape kept replaying long after the room went silent. Each time Detective Calloway heard something new, a hesitation that didn't belong there. A breath caught mid-sentence, a whisper of something unspoken. Daniel Trent's voice wasn't the voice of a man seeking forgiveness. It was the voice of someone holding back, of someone protecting a truth too heavy to release. The next morning, the confession made headlines. Every local station, every paper, every podcast jumped on it. Ohio cold case cracked after 24 years, confession stuns investigators. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse cameras, flashing like lightning in a storm. The town of Copley had waited a quarter of a century for closure, but what they got instead was confusion. Daniel sat in county jail expressionless, polite, eerily calm. He didn't fit the image of a killer. No record, no violence, no history of anger. Just a quiet man who delivered packages and mowed his lawn every Sunday. Neighbors said they'd never seen him raise his voice. His wife told reporters he'd been having nightmares for months before the arrest, nightmares about snowblood and headlights disappearing into the dark. In the interrogation room, he didn't ask for special treatment. He just sat hands folded as though he was waiting for something inevitable. When Calloway walked in, he greeted her with a small nod. "You listened to the tape," he said. It wasn't a question. "I did," she replied, "and I don't think you told us everything." He smiled faintly, that same unsettling calm. Nobody ever tells everything. Not the cops, not the killers, not even the dead. She studied him, the way he avoided eye contact, the way his fingers tapped an invisible rhythm on the table. "You said you went there to settle something old. What was it?" He hesitated, then exhaled. "Thomas owed me," he said. "He promised me something and he broke that promise. I just wanted him to admit it." "What did he promise you?" Daniel's eyes flicked up sharp and cold. The truth, he said. But when pressed, he went silent. No more answers, just the ticking of the wall clock echoing through the sterile room. That night, Calloway went through the old files again. She pulled every photograph, every report, every piece of evidence from 1999. And, buried deep in the notes, she found something strange, a handwritten memo from one of the original detectives. A single line scrawled in the margin. Possible love triangle. Rachel had connection to Daniel T. Calloway froze. Rachel, Daniel, the library. She began tracing back through old employment records, phone logs, and witness statements. Rachel Miller had volunteered at a community center in 1997, the same year Daniel Trent worked there part-time. Their names appeared together on several event rosters. Nothing romantic on paper, but the overlap was undeniable. The theory began to take shape like a shadow under light. Maybe this wasn't just about Thomas. Maybe the motive had always been Rachel. The next day, Calloway visited Daniel again. She slid the old memo across the table. "You knew her," she said. Rachel Miller, before the murders. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something in his jaw tightened. "Everyone knew Rachel," he said softly. "She remembered your name after one meeting, made you feel seen. People like that. They stay with you." "Stay with you, how?" He didn't answer. "You told us you went there to talk to Thomas, but you didn't say why Rachel was afraid before she died. Her coworkers said she was jumpy, nervous, like she thought someone was following her." Daniel looked down. "She wasn't afraid of me." "Then who?" He looked up, eyes hollow. "You don't want that answer." For a moment, the room felt colder, the kind of silence that feels alive. After the interview, Calloway stepped out into the corridor. Through the narrow window, snow was falling again, thick and soundless. A coincidence, or something else. She called the crime lab requesting a deeper analysis of the DNA. "Run it through every cross-reference database," she told them. "I want to know if there's any secondary match, partial, familial, whatever you can find." Then she turned to the original evidence photographs again, zooming in on details no one had paid attention to before. A half-smoked cigarette, 2 coffee mugs on the counter, 1 lipstick stained, 1 clean, both still warm when police arrived. 2 mugs. But the report said Rachel was already dead when Thomas came home, which meant she'd had coffee with someone else before the murders. Someone who left before the shots were fired. Someone whose name had never been recorded. The doorbell rang once, twice, then the screaming started. The question now wasn't who killed the Millers, it was how many people were in that house that night. Days later, the lab called back. They'd found something unusual. A partial secondary DNA trace on the cigarette butt, too faint to identify, but it didn't belong to Daniel Thomas or Rachel. Someone else had touched it. That revelation hit the department like a thunderclap. Maybe Daniel hadn't acted alone. Maybe he was covering for someone, or maybe he wasn't the killer at all. He wasn't. Calloway replayed the tape again. This time she listened not to what Daniel said, but to how he said it. The rhythm, the pauses. the way he whispered she wasn't supposed to be there. She went back to his background, 1999, his age, his friends. And then she found it. A single arrest record from that year. Not Daniel, but his younger brother, Mark Trent, arrested for assault in a bar fight 2 months before the murders. Released without charge. Mark had disappeared from public records shortly after 2001. No job history, no driver's license renewals, nothing. Like he'd vanished. Calloway checked the family genealogy from the DNA database again. The match could have been either brother. The cigarette might not have belonged to Daniel at all. If that was true, then the confession, the calm, calculated confession, wasn't guilt. It was protection. She drove to Daniel's neighborhood at dawn, engine idling outside his quiet, snow-covered house. His wife had refused interviews. The curtains were drawn tight. But the neighbors said something odd that 2 weeks before his arrest, a man had been seen sitting in a car across the street every night, engine running, headlights off. A dark sedan out of state plates. Calloway pulled up the footage from a nearby traffic cam, and there it was, grainy, distant, but unmistakable. A face in the driver's seat. Older, tired, resemblance striking. Mark Trent. He was alive. The truth began to unfold like a slow, inevitable storm. Daniel wasn't the monster everyone believed he was. He was the sacrifice. The confession wasn't a surrender, it was a shield. But why protect a ghost? When Calloway returned to the station, she played the tape again one last time. The moment when Daniel said, "The truth doesn't die, it just waits." Now she understood. The truth wasn't about guilt, it was about loyalty, about blood, about how far a man would go to protect the one person he'd promised to save. Outside, the wind howled over the frozen fields of Ohio, carrying echoes of a night buried under 2 decades of silence. The town believed the nightmare was over, but for Detective Calloway it was just beginning. Because somewhere out there in the endless white, a man named Mark Trent was still breathing, and the real story of that winter night had yet to be told. And in a town haunted by ghosts, one question remained. If Daniel wasn't the killer, who was he protecting? The first light of morning crept over the Ohio horizon, turning the snow into a field of glass. Detective Calloway hadn't slept. The image of the dark sedan lingered in her mind. The face behind the windshield burned into her thoughts. Mark Trent, a ghost resurfaced after 2 decades, quietly watching from the shadows while his brother confessed to the crime. She poured herself another cup of coffee, the kind that tasted like metal and regret. The case file sat open in front of her pages, yellowed photographs curling at the corners. 2 bodies, 1 cigarette, 1 confession that no longer made sense. The evidence was changing shape like something alive. By 7 a.m., she was at the records office digging through the old archives. She found Mark's name buried in a police report from 1999, a bar fight 2 months before the murders. The victim had refused to press charges, but the details caught her eye. The bar was only 3 blocks from the Miller's home, and the fight had started over a woman named Rachel. Rachel Miller. The words hit like a hammer. Mark had been 23, then younger, impulsive, the kind of man who burned hot and fast. But there was no follow-up, no investigation linking him to the murders, just silence. Calloway traced his history forward. In 2000, he'd enlisted in the Army. Served overseas for 2 years, discharged in 2002 for psychological evaluation. Then, nothing. No address, no bank account, no trail. Like he'd simply disappeared into the folds of the country. Until now. She brought the information to her captain, who leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "You're telling me the brother of the guy who confessed might have actually done it?" "I'm telling you," she said, Daniel's confession doesn't match the evidence. He's covering for someone, and all signs point to Mark. The captain sighed. "You've got a 24-year-old case that's technically closed, a confession on tape, and a man in custody. You really want to open that door again?" Calloway didn't blink. That door was never closed, it was just locked. By noon, she was on the road again, driving through the endless white fields of northern Ohio. The world felt quiet, too quiet, as if holding its breath. She followed the paper trail to an old address in Lima, a worn-down duplex registered to a John Mercer. Fake name, fake ID, but the date of birth matched Mark's exactly. The landlord remembered him, kept to himself, he said. Paid cash, moved out last month, left behind a few boxes in the basement, never came back for him. Calloway asked to see them. The basement smelled of dust and mildew. In one corner sat a small pile of boxes duct-taped shut. She pulled the first one open and froze. Inside were dozens of newspaper clippings all about the Miller murders, every anniversary article, every mention of the case, some marked with red ink circles around words like confession DNA justice. In the second box, she found photographs, snapshots taken from a distance. Daniel outside his home. Daniel's wife picking up the kids, the family at the grocery store. He'd been watching them for years, but it was the third box that stopped her cold. Inside was a faded photo of Rachel Miller, smiling, head-tilted, slightly eyes, full of light. On the back, written in neat handwriting, she said she'd wait. Calloway felt her pulse rise. This wasn't random obsession, this was history. She called the precinct, "Get me Daniel Trent, I need to see him now." When she entered the interview room, Daniel was already seated. His eyes were calm, but there was a flicker of something behind them, something like fear. "I found Mark," she said. He didn't move. "No," he whispered. "You found what's left of him. Where is he, Daniel?" He shook his head. "He's gone." "Gone where?" Daniel's voice cracked for the first time. "He's been gone for years, Sarah, but he's still here. Don't you get it? He's everywhere. Every time I close my eyes, I see him in that house. He's not alive the way you think." She leaned forward. "You took the blame for him, didn't you?" Silence, then a trembling exhale. "I had to. He didn't mean to kill them." Calloway's stomach turned. So he did kill them. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He loved her. He loved Rachel. He thought Thomas was hurting her. He went there to protect her, but something went wrong. Thomas fought back, and when it was over, his voice faltered. He called me. I found him in the snow holding her hand. He said, "I fixed it, Danny. I fixed it." Calloway stared at him, the horror settling in like ice. "And you helped him cover it up. I had no choice. He was my brother, and he wasn't right in the head after the war. I thought he'd turn himself in, but he didn't. He disappeared. I thought maybe he was dead, but then..." "Then what?" Daniel looked up, eyes wide with something between fear and awe. Then the letters started. He reached into his memory like someone reaching into darkness. They came every year, no return address, always postmarked from a different state, always signed the same way for her. The room fell silent. Calloway sat back, her mind racing. The confession wasn't just about guilt, it was about punishment. Daniel had been living under the weight of those letters of his brother's ghost, waiting for someone to come knocking. "Where's the last letter?" she asked. "At my house," he said quietly, "in the shed behind the garage." Within the hour, Calloway was there. Snow crunched under her boots as she stepped into the small, dimly lit shed. Old tools hung on the walls. A workbench cluttered with rusted nails and wood scraps, and in one corner a box marked "Keep Closed." Inside were dozens of envelopes stacked neatly, each one dated, each one opened carefully, but kept. She pulled out the most recent, postmarked October 2023, 3 months before his arrest. The handwriting was shaky but deliberate. "Danny, you don't have to carry it anymore. I'll come back when it's time. She's still waiting for us." No signature, just the same closing line for her. Calloway's breath caught. Whoever wrote this wasn't dead, and they weren't finished. She turned to leave, but something glinted under the workbench. She crouched down and found a small metal box locked with a broken latch. Inside was an old photograph, 2 young men and a woman standing together in front of a lake. The Millers' lake house, according to the case file. Rachel in the middle, smiling between them. Daniel on one side, Mark on the other. They'd all known each other, long before the murders. The story was rewriting itself again line by line. Back at the station, Calloway pinned the photo to the evidence board. "It wasn't just love," she murmured. "It was betrayal." Her partner frowned. "So Mark kills Thomas out of jealousy, then Rachel gets caught in the crossfire." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe Rachel was never the victim they thought she was." The words hung in the air sharp and heavy, because in one of the old files, Rachel's bank records showed a cash withdrawal, $5,000 made the day before she died. Money that was never recovered. Calloway felt a chill run through her. What if Rachel had been planning to leave? What if Mark knew? And what if the double murder wasn't a crime of passion, but a pact gone wrong. Outside, the snow kept falling soft and endless. Somewhere out there, a man who should have been dead was still writing letters to a brother behind bars, to a woman buried under ice, to a truth that refused to stay hidden. The cold case was supposed to be solved, but now it was alive again, twisting, growing, whispering through the cracks of time. And as the lights of Copley flickered under the winter storm, Detective Calloway realized the hardest truth of all. In a story built on lies, the confession is never the end. It's just the beginning of another mystery. The storm had not stopped. It rolled through Ohio like a living thing, swallowing highways, painting the world in shades of white and silence. Detective Sarah Calloway drove through it, headlights cutting through the haze wipers, groaning against the glass. On the passenger seat lay the letter, "You don't have to carry it anymore. I'll come back when it's time." The ink slightly smudged the words, almost breathing on their own. If Mark Trent was alive, he was somewhere out there watching. And if the letter was real, then the case that everyone believed solved was about to unravel again, thread by thread. She reached the postal sorting facility where the last envelope had been processed. The worker, a man in his 60s, with tired eyes and nicotine fingers, flipped through old logs until he found the record. The letter had been mailed from Henderson, Kentucky, 200 miles south. No name, no return address. Just a small postmark, faded but legible. Kentucky, a new ghost on the map. By morning, she was there, a flat, wind-bitten town surrounded by empty fields and rusted barns. The kind of place where time didn't move, it waited. Henderson wasn't the kind of town where strangers went unnoticed. Within an hour, she'd drawn curious looks from locals, sipping coffee in the diner. One of them, an older woman, with a gray scarf, leaned in and asked, "You're not here about that Trent fella, are you?" Calloway froze. "You know him." The woman nodded. "He was here for a while. Worked odd jobs. Quiet man, kept to himself. Rented the old Miller house off Route 9. Funny coincidence, huh? Same name as your victims." The irony was almost cruel. Calloway drove to the address, a sagging two-story farmhouse with peeling white paint half buried in snow. She pushed open the front door, which creaked like an old confession. Inside, dust floated in beams of gray light. The air smelled of oil and solitude. On the table sat a typewriter, ancient, the kind that left heavy black letters. Next to it, a stack of papers, letters, unsent. Dozens of them. Each one addressed the same way Danny I see her in my dreams. She picked one up. The words were uneven, trembling. "I tried to make it right, Danny. I thought if I fixed it, she'd forgive me. But she never came back. She never said goodbye. You said I should move on, but how do you bury something that never died?" In the corner of the room was a wooden chest. Inside, photographs, newspaper clippings, and an object wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it carefully and found herself staring at a revolver. Rusted old, but intact. The serial number scratched off. Calloway's breath hitched. The murder weapon. She called it in her voice, steady but low. Within hours, the house was crawling with investigators, forensics teams, state police. Every piece of evidence bagged, photographed, cataloged. But as they worked, one thing became clear. Mark Trent hadn't been living there recently. There was no food, no clothes, no sign of heat or water. The dust on the floor was thick. He'd been gone for weeks, maybe months. What they did find, however, was a wallet tucked under the floorboards, an Ohio ID expired 20 years ago. Mark Trent's face stared up from the cracked plastic, and behind it, a photograph of Rachel Miller. Younger, happier, her arm draped around Mark's shoulder. The image told a story no report ever had. This wasn't just a fleeting obsession, this was love, twisted, desperate, and buried. That night back at her motel, Calloway spread the evidence across the bed. The revolver, the letters, the photo, the timeline. It didn't add up. If Mark had vanished after the murders, who was sending the letters all these years, someone had been mailing them consistently, one every winter, always from a different state. Someone organized, someone deliberate. She stared at the typewriter, the uneven ink, the misaligned letters, and then she noticed it the same small imperfection on every page. The capital R pressed deeper than the others. She flipped through the case files again, old letters Rachel had written to friends found after her death. typed on a typewriter. The same deep R. For a moment, everything stopped. Rachel Miller had owned a typewriter, the same one now sitting in Mark's abandoned house, which meant someone had brought it there, someone who'd known exactly what it was. The next morning, Calloway returned to Ohio. She drove straight to the county jail and demanded to see Daniel Trent again. He looked worse pale, hollow, the kind of exhaustion that lives behind the eyes. She dropped the photo and the letter on the table between them. "Your brother was in Kentucky," she said. "He left behind the gun, the letters, and this photo." And Daniel stared at it as silent. "You told me he was gone," she pressed. "But he's not, is he?" Daniel's hands trembled slightly. "You found the house." "I did." "Then you know." "Know what?" He looked up slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't writing those letters. "Then who was—" Daniel's face twisted, grief and dread colliding. "Rachel." Calloway blinked. "Rachel was dead." He nodded. "Yeah, she was supposed to be." The room went still. "She planned it." He continued, his words spilling like cracks in ice. "She was going to run. She told Mark she couldn't do it anymore, that Thomas was controlling her. She said they'd start over, but Thomas found out. There was a fight. Mark lost control. He shot Thomas. Then Rachel tried to stop him. He turned the gun and it went off. He panicked. He thought she was dead." Calloway leaned in. "Thought?" Daniel's voice dropped. "She wasn't." He told her what no one had ever imagined, that Rachel Miller hadn't died instantly that night. When Daniel arrived at the scene, Mark was gone. Rachel was barely breathing. She whispered something to him, just one sentence before she slipped away. "Don't let him find me." Those words haunted him for decades. When the police came, he didn't correct them. He let them believe she was gone. He let the narrative harden into tragedy. And when the case went cold, the letters began, the first one arriving a year later, written in Rachel's voice, describing dreams, regrets, love. He assumed they were from Mark, trying to keep her memory alive. But now, looking back, he wasn't sure. Because every letter was typed, and Rachel was the only one who owned that typewriter. Calloway felt her throat tighten. "You think Rachel survived. You think she's the one sending the letters." Daniel nodded. "I don't think it. I know it." It sounded impossible. Yet the more she thought about it, the more the details fit: the missing money, the inconsistent medical report, the open casket that had been closed at the last minute due to condition of remains. What if it had been staged? What if Rachel had disappeared into the world, letting the men who loved her destroy themselves in her shadow? Calloway left the jail with her pulse hammering. Snow fell harder now, blurring the world into gray. She replayed every piece of the puzzle in her head. Rachel's fear before her death, the coffee mug on the table, the missing money, the letters that always arrived in winter. Maybe this wasn't a story about murder. Maybe it was about escape. She stopped at a gas station just outside town. The clerk was reading a newspaper, the headline about Daniel's confession, the photo of the victims underneath. Calloway's eyes flicked to the woman on the cover, Rachel Miller. Then she saw the reflection in the window, a woman outside, standing by a silver sedan scarf pulled over her face, staring directly at the paper. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass. And in that instant, Calloway's breath caught, because the woman's eyes, gray-blue sharp haunted, were unmistakable. Rachel Miller, alive. Before she could react, the woman turned, got into the car, and disappeared into the storm. Calloway ran outside, snow whipping against her face, heart pounding in her chest. The taillights vanished down the road, fading into white. She stood there for a long moment, frozen, the cold biting her skin. The truth was no longer buried. It was moving alive, fragile, and more dangerous than ever. The Ohio double murder had never been solved, because the story had never truly ended. And somewhere beyond the snow, the woman who had started it all was still running from guilt, from love, from the ghosts she had created. And Detective Sarah Calloway was about to chase her into the storm. The snow was coming down in heavy sheets when Detective Sarah Calloway started her car. Her fingers shook as she gripped the steering wheel, eyes locked on the road ahead, the same road where a woman who was supposed to be dead had just vanished into the storm. Rachel Miller. The name pulsed in her mind like a heartbeat she couldn't silence. She replayed the image again and again, the flash of gray-blue eyes through the glass, the faint outline of a scar near the corner of the mouth, the way she moved cautious but purposeful. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't coincidence. Rachel Miller had been standing there, alive. Calloway radioed dispatch, voice tight. Silver sedan heading west on Route 19, possible link to the Miller homicide case plate, partial. She paused, staring at the snow-smeared windshield. The plate was gone, blurred by the storm. The road ahead was empty. She turned the car toward the highway tires, biting through slush. Her headlights carved tunnels of light through the darkness. Every few miles, she caught glimpses of taillights, red distant, disappearing over the next rise. She pushed harder, the engine groaning. After 40 minutes, the car she was following pulled into a rest stop, deserted, swallowed by snowdrifts. The silver sedan sat under a flickering light. The driver's door opened. A woman stepped out wrapped in a long coat face hidden beneath a scarf. Calloway parked 2 rows back. Her pulse quickened. She stepped out slowly, boots crunching against the frozen pavement. Rachel. The woman froze, turned slightly. For a split second, Calloway saw her face. The same delicate features from the photos, aged but unmistakable. But there was something else, a deep sadness carved into her eyes, the kind that comes from carrying too many secrets for too long. Rachel Miller Calloway called again, her voice trembling. The woman didn't answer. She took 1 step back, then another. "Don't run," Calloway said softly. "You don't have to hide anymore." Rachel hesitated. Then, almost whispering, "You shouldn't have come." And before Calloway could react, the woman turned and disappeared into the dark tree line behind the rest stop, vanishing like smoke. Calloway chased her flashlight, cutting through the storm. The forest swallowed sound, the wind howling like a voice from somewhere ancient. She saw flashes of movement, a coat here, a shadow there, but every step she took sank deeper into snow. After several minutes, the tracks stopped at the edge of a frozen river. On the other side, tire marks curved back toward the highway. She was gone, again. By dawn, the scene was sealed off. Search teams swept the area, drones scanned from above. Nothing, not a trace. It was as if the woman had stepped out of one life and back into the ghost of another. Back at the precinct, the room buzzed with disbelief. The official story, the Miller double homicide, had already closed neatly in public view. But now, behind locked doors, the detectives argued. "You're saying she faked her death?" one of them asked. "For 24 years? That's insane." "She had help," Calloway said. "Someone staged it. Someone made sure the body in that casket wasn't hers." Then who was it? That was the question clawing at her. The autopsy report from 1999 had been incomplete decomposition, they'd said, due to the fire damage in the kitchen. Closed casket burial, unverified identification. DNA wasn't standard then. The only confirmation came from dental records provided by... She flipped through the files, her stomach tightening. Provided by Thomas Miller's employer, a small-town dentist. The same man who'd quietly retired 6 months after the murders. The same man who'd moved to Henderson, Kentucky, the town where Mark Trent's letters had been mailed from. The pattern was no longer coincidence, it was choreography. Rachel had never disappeared. She had reinvented herself with help. Calloway's mind raced. A false death, a staged burial, a string of letters to manipulate guilt. Every piece fit together like an elaborate play directed by grief and control. But why send letters for decades? Why stay hidden when everyone she feared was gone? She opened the last letter again, reading it aloud in the quiet of her office. "You don't have to carry it anymore. I'll come back when it's time." When it's time. Time for what? She returned to the jail that night. Daniel Trent sat in his cell staring at the wall, his expression hollow. "She's alive," Calloway said. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just whispered, "I know." "You saw her." He shook his head. "Not since that night, but I knew. You can't kill someone like her. She's too clever, too scared, too determined. Why didn't you tell us? Would you have believed me?" His laugh was low, bitter. Everyone needed her to be dead. It made the story cleaner. Calloway stepped closer. "She's still out there, Daniel. You need to help me find her." He looked up, his eyes distant. "You won't find her unless she wants you to. Rachel doesn't get found. She finds you." When she left the cell, his words followed her down the corridor like footsteps in an empty hall. That night, Calloway spread all the photos across her wall timelines, faces, maps. In the center, Rachel's eyes staring out from a 24-year-old photograph. Underneath it, she pinned a note, "She's not running from guilt. She's running from truth." The next morning, a call came in from a motel clerk in Paducah, Kentucky, 2 towns over. He'd seen the news about the case, said a woman matching Rachel's description had checked in under the name Ann Lowell, paid cash, drove a silver sedan. Calloway was there within hours. The motel room was small, clean, methodical. No fingerprints, no ID, just a half-empty glass of water and a note left on the dresser. "Stop chasing me, Sarah. You don't understand what happened. You're looking for a killer." But the truth is worse than that. Her name was on the note. Calloway's pulse thundered. She turned to the mirror above the dresser and froze. Scratched faintly into the surface of the glass were 3 words. "He's still here." She stepped back, breath quickening. The room was silent, but it didn't feel empty. That night, back in her car, she listened to the storm fade outside. She played the confession tape again. Daniel's voice, whispering, "He's not alive the way you think." What if Rachel wasn't running from Daniel or from justice? What if she was running from someone else? Someone who had never been caught? The letters, the typewriter, the gun. Every clue led to Mark Trent, but the body had never been found, and if he was alive, he'd been following her, watching her. And maybe, just maybe, he was the one who'd been mailing the letters all along. That night, as the snow thinned and the wind died, Calloway finally saw it. The truth she hadn't wanted to see. The letters weren't just guilt or love. They were messages, breadcrumbs, a dialogue between predator and prey. Rachel wasn't the ghost. She was the hunted. And Mark Trent was still out there. Calloway started the car again, adrenaline cutting through exhaustion. Somewhere out there, 2 survivors of a murder 24 years ago were circling each other, bound by obsession, guilt, and a secret that could tear everything apart. The cold case wasn't just reopening, it was waking up. And this time, it wasn't just about solving a murder. It was about stopping one. The snow was melting now, leaving behind mud and memory. Detective Sarah Calloway drove with the windows cracked, the cold wind biting her skin, trying to keep herself awake. The road stretched endless through the Kentucky fields, gray and silent, dotted with barns that looked like forgotten graves. Somewhere beyond those fields, 2 people were running from a story that refused to end. Rachel Miller, Mark Trent, 2 names carved into a history written in blood and silence. The GPS blinked last trace of the silver sedan caught by a traffic camera heading east toward Tennessee. No tags, no toll records, just a ghost trail. But Calloway knew how ghosts worked. They didn't vanish. They circled back, always to where it started. She stopped at a diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where time felt heavy. The waitress poured her coffee without asking. "You look like you've been chasing something," she said with a half smile. Calloway nodded. "Maybe I have." The waitress tilted her head. "You chasing ghosts or people?" "Both." The woman gave her a long look. "Then you better learn which one's more dangerous." Outside, a delivery truck pulled up. The logo caught her eye, Trent Hauling and Storage. The name twisted her stomach. She walked to the driver's window. "Hey, you related to Daniel or Mark Trent?" The driver frowned. "Mark." "Yeah, he's my uncle. Least that's what my mom says. Haven't seen him in years. Why, did he ever live around here?" "Sure, out by the river near the old quarry, but that place has been empty forever." "The old quarry?" By nightfall, Calloway was there. The road narrowed into dirt trees, arching overhead like a tunnel. The river ran black under the moonlight, half-frozen, whispering against the rocks. The quarry loomed ahead, an open wound carved into the earth, abandoned since the early 2000s. She parked at the edge and stepped out. The air felt wrong, still, listening. Her flashlight cut through the dark. Tire tracks, fresh, leading down toward the base of the pit. She followed them, slowly, gun drawn. Every crunch of gravel sounded too loud. Halfway down, she saw it, the silver sedan engine off door open, driver's seat empty. Rachel, no answer. Only the echo of her own voice. She approached the car carefully. Inside, on the passenger seat, lay another letter. Folded neatly, her name typed across the top. "Sarah, I didn't lie to you. He's here. He never stopped. I thought I could end it. But you'll see soon enough. Don't follow me." Before she could finish reading, a sound cut through the air, a low metallic click, the unmistakable slide of a revolver being cocked. She turned slowly. At the edge of the tree line stood a man, thin, gray-bearded eyes, hollow and bright. His coat hung heavy on his frame. His right hand held a gun, the same rusted model found in the Kentucky house. Mark Trent Calloway said quietly. He smiled faintly. Took you long enough. Put the weapon down. She told you, didn't she, Rachel? She always gets people to believe her. His voice cracked, rising into something like laughter. You think she's the victim? You think she didn't plan it all? She's been running from you, Mark. No. He shook his head, trembling. She's been running with me. You don't understand. None of you ever did. He stepped closer, the gun steady, but his eyes unfocused. It wasn't supposed to happen that night. She wanted to leave him start over. I said I'd help. I thought I was saving her. But when she told me she never meant to go with me, something broke. His voice dropped to a whisper. She used me, and I killed for her. Calloway's pulse pounded. You killed Thomas. He nodded. And she watched. She didn't scream. She didn't even move. She just stared at me like she'd been waiting for it. The wind cut through the quarry sharp and cold. What about Rachel? She asked. What happened after? He looked away. She wanted to disappear. Said we'd both be free if the world thought she was dead. So I helped her. We burned the kitchen. We switched the dental records. Daniel came later, but by then it was already done. She faked her death, Calloway said softly. He nodded again. And then she ran. But she couldn't stay gone. Every year she wrote, sometimes from towns I'd already been through, sometimes from places I didn't know existed. Always the same words, I'm sorry, for her. He lowered the gun slightly. His eyes looked tired, ancient. You see, Detective, I didn't come here to kill her. I came here to finish what she started. Before Calloway could respond, another voice echoed across the quarry, calm, steady, familiar. Mark. Calloway turned. At the far edge of the pit stood a figure in a dark coat, snow collecting in her hair. Rachel Miller. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The wind died. The world went silent. Rachel took a step forward. You don't need to do this. Mark's eyes filled with tears. You made me, Rachel. You told me he hurt you. You said you were scared. I was, she said softly. But not of him, of you. The gun trembled. You lied. I survived. The words hit him like a blade. He staggered, lowering the gun for a moment long enough for Calloway to step closer, her own weapon drawn. Mark put it down. It's over. But he wasn't listening anymore. His gaze stayed locked on Rachel, his voice breaking. All I wanted was for you to love me. Rachel's eyes glistened. I did once, but not the way you needed. He took one slow step forward, then another. The gun rose again. Calloway shouted, Drop it! A shot rang out. The sound echoed across the quarry, a single shattering thunderclap swallowed by snow and stone. When the silence returned, Mark Trent was on the ground, the gun spinning out of his hand. A dark stain spread through his coat. Rachel stood frozen, the revolver in her hand, trembling smoke rising from the barrel. Calloway ran forward, grabbing her arm. Rachel, drop it! Rachel let the gun fall. Her breath came in shallow gasps. I didn't want to, she whispered. He wouldn't stop. Calloway looked down at Mark, still breathing barely. His lips moved blood, bubbling at the corners. She wins again, he rasped. Then his eyes glazed over. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Red and blue lights began to flash against the walls of the quarry, but none of it felt real. Rachel sank to her knees, staring at the body. It's over, she said softly, but her tone carried no relief. Calloway crouched beside her. You could have come forward. You could have told the truth 24 years ago. Rachel's eyes met hers, hollow, exhausted, ancient. There was no truth to tell, only people trying to survive it. The words lingered in the air as officers rushed in, shouts echoing through the cold. Rachel was led away. In Cuff's silent eyes forward, Calloway watched her go, the snow falling softly between them like ashes. The case that had haunted Ohio for 2 decades was finally over, or so the headlines would say. Ohio double murder mystery woman found alive, suspect killed in standoff. The story would be packaged neatly for the evening news. Justice served. End of story. But Calloway knew better. In her mind, she still heard Rachel's voice, quiet and calm. You're looking for a killer, but the truth is worse than that. Weeks later, back at her desk, she read the final autopsy report. Mark Trent, cause of death, gunshot wound. On his wrist, a faint tattoo, RM Rachel's initials. And in evidence storage, the typewriter sat sealed in a plastic case. When the technicians opened the last sheet of paper still in the roller, they found one unfinished line typed in that same deep, uneven ink. "It's never over when you bury love alive." Calloway stared at the words for a long time, then she turned off the light and left the room. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, endless, familiar. And somewhere, deep in Ohio, under all that white silence, the ghosts of the Miller murders finally rested. Or so everyone hoped, because in the quiet after the storm, a new letter was already on its way, postmarked from Paducah, Kentucky. No return address, just 4 words typed clean and deliberate, for her, always. M. The snow had melted, but the chill never left. Weeks passed, and the story of the Ohio double murder had already taken on the shape of legend, whispered on talk shows, dissected in podcasts, filed neatly away in archives that promised closure. But for Detective Sarah Calloway, closure was just a word the living used to make peace with the dead. Mark Trent was buried in a quiet cemetery outside Copley, a simple wooden cross marking the grave of a man the world believed to be the final villain. Rachel Miller was in custody awaiting psychiatric evaluation before trial. Daniel Trent had been released, charges dropped after DNA evidences and testimony cleared him of the murders. The world on paper had been set right again. But something still itched beneath the surface, a faint, persistent unease like a breath behind her shoulder that wouldn't go away. It arrived in her mailbox one cold morning, a plain white envelope. No return address. No markings except her name typed in perfect black letters, Sarah Calloway. She tore it open, hands trembling before she even knew why. Inside one line, for her, always, M. Postmarked 2 days after Mark Trent's death. Her breath hitched, her skin went cold. She read it again, slower this time, tracing the letters with her eyes. The same uneven typeface, the same slight indentation on the capital R, the same machine, the same typewriter. The one locked in evidence storage. She didn't think. She just moved. Within an hour, she was at the police station, flashing her badge at the clerk in evidence. "The Trent case," she said. "Where's the typewriter?" The clerk frowned. "Still in the archive. Nobody's touched it." "I need to see it." He hesitated, then led her down the long corridor, the air heavy with dust and silence. Rows of shelves stretched like forgotten tombs. He stopped at the 3rd row, unlocked the steel cabinet, and pulled out the plastic evidence box. Calloway froze. The seal was intact, unbroken. Inside, the typewriter sat exactly as they'd left it. Keys stiff with age, ribbon nearly dry. The page still in the roller. That haunting unfinished sentence, "It's never over when you bury love alive." The envelope in her hand trembled. Same ink, same press, same weight of keys. Someone had mailed that letter after the evidence was sealed. Someone had access. Someone inside. She signed the chain of custody log and carried the letter to the lab. Compare this to the existing samples, she told the technician. "I want pressure marks, alignment, key, depression, everything." Hours later, he returned pale. "It's a match," he said. Same machine, same pattern, but there's one difference: the pressure on the keys. Whoever typed this used more force. Different rhythm. Different hand. She stared at him, not Mark. He shook his head. "No, someone else." The walls seemed to close in. The fluorescent light flickered. A shadow passed through her mind. Rachel's voice from that last night, "You're looking for a killer. But the truth is worse than that." She drove straight to the psychiatric facility where Rachel was being held. The nurse at the desk gave her a cautious look. "She doesn't talk much," she warned. "Hasn't said a word since the night of the arrest." Calloway walked down the corridor, the echo of her boots the only sound. Rachel sat by the window of her room, wrapped in gray light hair, loose eyes unfocused. The snow outside had started again, faint flakes dancing in the reflection of the glass. "You've got mail," Calloway said quietly, setting the letter on the table between them. "Recognize it." Rachel's eyes flicked to it. For a moment, something passed over her face, a tremor, a flicker of emotion she couldn't hide. "Mark's dead," Calloway said, "but someone used your typewriter. Someone mailed this after he was buried." Rachel said nothing. "I want to know who." She turned slowly toward Calloway. You wouldn't believe me. Try me. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. He's not dead. Calloway's jaw tightened. I saw him. I saw the body. Rachel shook her head. You saw what I wanted you to see. Her words hung there, heavy, echoing through the sterile air. What do you mean? Rachel smiled faintly, eyes distant. You think Mark would let me shoot him? You think after all these years, after everything we did together, he'd let it end that easily? She leaned closer, her breath cold and calm. He planned that night. Every move, every word. He wanted you there. He wanted witnesses. He wanted to disappear again for good. That's impossible, Calloway said. The autopsy was rushed. They never confirmed his identity. They didn't even compare prints. You were too busy writing the ending. Calloway's pulse pounded in her ears. You're lying. Rachel's gaze was steady. I've been lying my whole life, detective, but not about this. Silence. The snow outside thickened, swirling like ash. Why send me the letter? Calloway asked. Rachel tilted her head, a ghost of a smile crossing her lips. Because he's not done with me, and now he's not done with you. That night, Calloway couldn't sleep. She sat in her car outside the station, the letter on the dashboard, the words burning into her thoughts. For her, always M. If Rachel was telling the truth, then everything, every confession, every headline, every so-called ending was just another performance. And if Mark Trent was alive, he was watching. 2 days later, she got confirmation. The lab called. Detective, you might want to sit down for this. What is it? We ran the fingerprints from the revolver found at the quarry, the prints we assumed were Mark's. The tech hesitated. They're not. They belong to someone else. Who? The pause was long enough to make her heart sink. Rachel Miller? The room seemed to tilt. That's impossible, she said. She shot him. The prints would be there. Not like this. These weren't on the handle. They were under the trigger assembly, internal, as if she'd cleaned or modified it before the shooting. Calloway's blood ran cold. Rachel hadn't shot Mark in panic. She'd prepared the weapon. She'd staged it. Again. That evening, she went back through every photograph, every frame from the quarry body cam footage, the coat, the hair, the angle of the shot. Then she saw it, something she'd missed before. The man they buried as Mark Trent had a burn scar on his right wrist. The same wrist injury described in the old file, belonging to Thomas Miller. Her stomach dropped. The gun, the scene, the story, all of it had been rebuilt, recycled, reanimated. Thomas Miller hadn't died in 1999, he'd disappeared, and he'd been living as Mark Trent ever since. The realization hit like a tidal wave. Rachel hadn't faked her death to escape her husband. She'd helped him disappear, and when he turned violent again, she'd done what she should have done all those years ago. But it was too late. Because now the line between Rachel Thomas and Mark had blurred into madness, a story told and retold, until no one could tell the victims from the villains. Calloway leaned back. The world spinning. The truth wasn't linear. It was circular. A cycle of guilt, obsession, and survival that never ended, only repeated. And the letter, sitting on her desk, postmarked from Paducah, Kentucky, was proof that the circle had started again. For her. Always. M. She stared at the window. Outside, a lone figure stood across the street, coat, dark head bowed motionless in the snow, watching. By the time she opened the door, he was gone. The street was empty, but on her windshield, pressed beneath the wiper, was another envelope. No stamp, no address, just a single sheet of paper inside the same faint typewriting. You solved the wrong murder. The snow began to fall harder, covering the street, the evidence, and every trace of the truth once again. And for the first time in her career, Detective Sarah Calloway realized the real horror wasn't the case she'd solved. It was the one that had just begun. It was past midnight when Detective Sarah Calloway finally let herself breathe. The city was quiet. A film of frost crawling up the glass, the hum of the radiator filling the silence. She sat in her apartment, lights off, staring at the single envelope that lay on her table. You solved the wrong murder. She'd read it a dozen times, and each time it felt heavier, more deliberate. Whoever had written it knew everything, not just the facts, but her doubts, her obsessions, her private thoughts about the case. This wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. She poured another coffee, though she knew it would do nothing for the cold that had settled deep in her bones. The letter was typed same uneven R, same ink texture, the same typewriter still locked in evidence. Except she'd confirmed the seal hours ago. It was unbroken. That meant one thing. Whoever sent it had a second machine, a twin. The thought twisted in her chest like a knife. She grabbed her phone and called the lab again. That typewriter, the one from the Trent house, what's the make and model? The tech sounded half asleep. Royal Quiet Deluxe 1946 model. Old, rare, only about 1,000 still in circulation. Can you trace sales or repairs? Anything that might tell me who owns another one. Not easily, he said. But there's a collector registry. You might get lucky. Lucky? She almost laughed. Nothing about this case had ever been luck. 2 hours later, she was driving through the rain toward Akron. The address belonged to a man named Harold Dunn, a collector who specialized in post-war typewriters. His shop sat at the end of a narrow street. The windows fogged, the sign faded. Inside, the air smelled of oil dust and time. Dunn was tall, gaunt, with fingers stained by ink. Detective, he said. When she showed her badge, you're here about the Royal. How'd you know? Because you're not the first. Her pulse jumped. Who else? He motioned towards the back room. A woman. Came by a few weeks ago. Said she was a writer. Wanted a Royal Quiet Deluxe 1946 in working condition. Paid cash. What did she look like? He thought for a moment. Mid-40s. Blonde, maybe gray now. Sharp eyes. Polite voice. Rachel. He opened a ledger and slid it toward her. The name on the receipt stopped her cold. Ann Lowell. The same alias Rachel had used at the motel in Paducah. She said it was for a story Dunn added. Something about rewriting the past. Calloway swallowed hard. Did she leave an address? Just a P.O. box, Toledo. Rachel was building her own archive. Typing her own version of the story, maybe rewriting it, maybe controlling it. Calloway left the shop with the rain cutting across her face. The deeper she went, the more the story twisted not toward resolution, but toward something darker. She'd spent her career chasing truth like it was a solid thing, something that stayed still once you found it. But this case had taught her otherwise. Truth moved. It adapted. It survived. And now it was moving toward her. By morning, she was in Toledo. The P.O. box led to an abandoned post office on the edge of town, shut down for years. The floor was covered in dust and shattered glass, but in the back behind the old counter, someone had been there recently. A small table, a lamp, and a typewriter identical to the one in evidence. Paper, still in the roller. Her hands shook as she pulled the sheet free. Dear Sarah, you think I ran from guilt, but guilt is a luxury for the living. I ran from something older than that, something you'll understand soon. The page ended there, no signature. But she knew who it was. The hair on her neck stood on end. She turned the faintest sound behind her like a footstep. She froze. Rachel. No answer. Only the soft hum of wind through broken glass. She stepped toward the back door, her flashlight slicing through the dark. A faint shadow moved, a figure slipping through the alley beyond. She ran. The air was sharp and wet, her boots splashing through puddles. But by the time she turned the corner, the street was empty. On the ground, half buried in mud, something caught her eye, a photograph. She picked it up. It was old edges curled. Colors faded. Rachel smiling beside another woman. A younger woman. The handwriting on the back, Rachel and Eleanor, 1975. Eleanor Calloway, her mother. Sarah's stomach turned to ice. She stumbled back, heart hammering. The world tilted. Rachel hadn't just chosen her by chance. This had been personal from the beginning. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered with trembling hands. A voice low and familiar came through the static. Now you understand, Rachel whispered. It was never about the Millers. It was about us. The line went dead. She stood there, rain soaking through her coat, the phone slipping from her hand, her mother's name, the photograph, the case that had haunted her, the one she thought she'd uncovered through instinct, through logic, had been set for her, lured toward her. She raced home, tearing through old boxes, family albums, anything that could prove what her gut already knew. And there it was, an old newspaper clipping tucked into her mother's scrapbook. Local librarian Rachel Monroe marries mechanic Thomas Miller, 1981. Rachel Monroe, her mother's best friend, her godmother. Calloway sank to the floor, the room spinning around her. The case she'd reopened wasn't random. It had been constructed to bring her here to this exact point. All those years ago, her mother had been the one who convinced Rachel to leave Thomas. They'd kept in touch through letters, until the murders. until Rachel vanished. And now, 24 years later, Rachel had returned not to escape justice, but to deliver it. The question was to whom? The knock on the door came softly, almost politely. Calloway drew her gun and opened it, just enough to see a shape in the hall. A woman soaked from rain hair, streaked with gray eyes, the same familiar blue-gray. Rachel. They stared at each other for a long, unbearable moment. "You planned this," Calloway said quietly. Rachel nodded once. "Because I needed you to see it." "See what?" "The truth your mother buried." Rachel stepped into the light, her face hollow but calm. "She was there that night, Sarah, your mother. She helped me disappear. She switched the records. She made it all look clean. And then she told me to run. Said you'd never understand." Calloway's breath caught. "You're lying." Rachel reached into her coat and pulled out another envelope, old yellowed edges brittle. She placed it on the table. This is her handwriting. Inside was a letter dated 1999. "Rachel, he'll never stop looking for you. I can't protect you anymore. Take the money and go. Don't come back. Tell no one, not even Sarah. Some truths destroy the ones who seek them." Eleanor Calloway. Sarah felt the room close in. The air thickened. Rachel's voice softened. "Your mother saved me, but she also saved him. She told the police what they needed to hear, and you've been chasing the shadow of that lie ever since." The silence between them stretched like a wire. Calloway looked at the gun in her hand, then at the woman who'd haunted every corner of her life without her even knowing it. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why come back?" Rachel looked toward the window, where the storm raged again. "Because he's not gone, Sarah. He never was. The man you buried, that wasn't Mark. It wasn't Thomas. It was someone else. He's still out there." Her voice trembled. "And now he's coming for both of us." Lightning flashed outside, bright and brief, painting their faces white. The letter on the table fluttered in the wind. The words blurred in the dim light, but one line stood out. "Some truths destroy the ones who seek them." Sarah Calloway finally understood. This wasn't just a cold case, it was an inheritance. And somewhere in the dark, someone was still writing the final chapter. The wind screamed against the glass as lightning split the sky open. Detective Sarah Calloway stood frozen in her apartment, the world narrowing to the sound of Rachel's voice and the trembling envelope on the table. The letter was real. The handwriting was her mother's. The same loops, the same tilt on the S. There was no mistaking it. Rachel Miller, or Rachel Monroe, as her mother once knew her, wasn't some random name tangled in an old Ohio tragedy. She was family. The case that had haunted Sarah's career had begun long before she was even born. Her mother had been part of it. Calloway's voice was steady when she finally spoke, but the ground beneath it was breaking. "You're saying my mother helped you fake your death?" Rachel nodded once. "She did more than that. She orchestrated it." "Why?" Rachel's eyes drifted toward the window, where rain streaked down like veins of glass. "Because she loved me. And because she feared what Thomas would do if I left." Sarah's pulse hammered. "You told me Thomas died that night." Rachel's gaze shifted back, calm and hollow. "He did. But he didn't stay dead." Lightning flashed again, illuminating her face. The fine lines carved by guilt, the faint scar on her jaw that hadn't been in the old photographs. She looked both alive and half-buried, like someone who'd spent too long pretending to be a ghost. "Start from the beginning," Calloway said. Rachel exhaled slowly, as if she'd been waiting her whole life for permission to tell it. "In 1999, your mother was my closest friend. We met through the library, shared everything books, coffee secrets. She was the only one who knew what Thomas was like behind closed doors. The rage, the control, the way he made me feel like I was his property. I told her I wanted out. She said she'd help me disappear." She paused, the silence heavy. "But Thomas found out. He went into a spiral. He thought I was seeing someone else. He thought it was Mark." "Mark Trent," Calloway whispered. Rachel nodded. "Thomas confronted him. There was a fight. I tried to stop it. The gun went off." Her hands trembled as she continued. "Thomas fell. He wasn't moving. There was blood everywhere. Mark panicked. He thought he'd killed him. He ran. I called your mother. She came that night. She helped me make it look like both of them were dead. She switched the dental records, planted the evidence, staged the fire. I thought it was over." Sarah's throat tightened. but Thomas survived. Rachel looked at her eyes full of quiet horror. He didn't just survive, he became someone else. The words landed like ice water. He found me 3 years later, Rachel continued. Different name, different face. I was living in Indiana under an alias your mother created for me. He came to the door in the middle of the night. I don't know how he found me. He said he'd forgiven me, that he'd changed. But when I looked in his eyes, it was the same darkness, the same hunger to control. He said he'd rebuilt his life, that he'd built a new name, Mark Trent. Calloway felt her heart pound against her ribs. The man she'd watched die in that quarry, the man everyone believed to be Mark Trent, had been Thomas Miller all along. Your mother knew, Rachel said softly. She knew he was alive. He sent her letters. He taunted her. She told me to stay hidden, to never come back. But I couldn't run forever. When I saw you reopen the case, I thought maybe it was time to end it. Calloway's head was spinning. Every revelation bled into the next until the truth was just fragments of lies layered over time. My mother died thinking this was buried, she murmured. Rachel's expression softened. She died protecting you from it. Thunder rolled outside, long and deep. Why contact me, Calloway asked. Why drag me into this? Rachel smiled faintly, though her eyes were wet. Because you were the only one left who could finish what she started. And because he's watching you now, Sarah. The words hit like a bullet. What do you mean? Rachel turned toward the window again, her face tightening. Thomas isn't done. You reopened the story he wanted buried. And he's never been able to let a story end. The lights flickered once, then again. A power cut swept through the room. Darkness swallowed everything but the pale glow of lightning beyond the curtains. Rachel's breathing quickened. He's here! Sarah drew her gun pulse, hammering in her ears. The apartment had gone completely silent. No hum, no wind. Just the heavy stillness of something holding its breath. Then a floorboard creaked. From the hallway. Stay behind me, Sarah whispered. Rachel shook her head. You don't understand. He won't hurt me. He wants you. Sarah stepped into the hall, every sense sharpened. The air was cold. She could smell rain and something faintly metallic like rust or blood. She moved slowly toward the door, then stopped. The front door was ajar. The chain still locked. Someone had picked it. She turned on her flashlight. For a split second, she saw him. A man, tall coat, dripping wet eyes gleaming in the beam of light. His voice was almost gentle. Detective Calloway. Sarah raised her weapon. Hands where I can see them. He smiled faintly. You sound just like her. Like who? Your mother. The words froze her in place. He took one step forward, unarmed, calm. Eleanor was a remarkable woman. She knew how to hide things, how to make the world believe what she needed them to. Thomas, she said. He tilted his head. I prefer Mark now. Thomas died a long time ago. Rachel appeared in the doorway behind her. Stop, please, she whispered. He looked at her, and for the first time, there was something almost human in his expression. You shouldn't have come back, Rachel. You had your freedom. You should have left the past where it belonged. It doesn't belong anywhere, she said. It follows us. It found you. He smiled. It found her. He nodded towards Sarah. You're her legacy, aren't you, the perfect daughter? The detective who solves what others can't. Tell me, Sarah, did you ever wonder why this case mattered to you more than any other? Sarah tightened her grip on the gun. Because it was my mother's lie. Exactly. His voice softened. You inherited it. The guilt. The obsession. The need to fix what can't be fixed. The lightning flashed again, brighter this time. For a moment, his face looked pale, hollow, almost corpse-like. Put your hands on your head, Sarah said. But he didn't move. Instead, he reached slowly into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Then read this first. Sarah hesitated, gun still raised. He dropped the envelope to the floor and stepped back. She wrote it. Your mother, the night before she died. Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears. Go on, he said softly. It's time you learned who killed whom. Then he smiled that same cold, knowing smile that had haunted every photograph from the old case. You never solved anything, detective. You just finished the work we started. He turned and disappeared into the stairwell before she could move, swallowed by shadow. Rachel screamed his name, but the sound died in the empty hall. By the time officers arrived, he was gone, again. Sarah stood there in the doorway. The envelope in her hands, its paper, damp with rain. Inside one final letter, written in her mother's unmistakable handwriting. Sarah, If you're reading this, it means you found her and him. I couldn't tell you before. Some things live too deep inside us to bring into the light. I helped her because I couldn't save myself. And I lied to protect you from the truth about your father. The words blurred as Sarah read them again, slower, the meaning sinking in like poison. Your father. The world tilted. Rachel's face blurred in the corner of her vision, her voice distant. Sarah, what is it? But Sarah couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Because the truth that had waited 24 years to surface had finally risen. Thomas Miller wasn't just her mother's friend's husband. He was her father. The man she'd just come face to face with in the dark. The man who had orchestrated every death, every lie, every letter. Not out of revenge, but out of love twisted into something monstrous. And now he was out there again, free, watching, waiting. Rachel's whisper broke through the silence. Sarah. What did the letter say? Sarah folded it slowly, her voice shaking. It said the cold case isn't over. Outside, thunder rolled one last time, deep and distant. The lights flickered back on, but the darkness in the room didn't leave. The letter shook in her hand like a living thing. Detective Sarah Calloway stared at her mother's handwriting, the loops, the slant, the faint smudge where a tear had once fallen and dried into the paper. The truth had been there all along, buried beneath decades of silence and half-told stories. Thomas Miller, the man she'd hunted, the man she'd believed to be a monster born from someone else's nightmare, was her father. Her voice came out in a whisper. He's my father. Rachel didn't speak. She didn't have to. The look on her face said everything: guilt, pity, and something like relief. Eleanor was trying to protect you, she said quietly. She thought keeping you away from him would end it. But it never ends, Sarah. Not with him. The storm outside was dying, but the air in the room felt heavier than before. Sarah folded the letter and slipped it into her coat pocket, her mind racing through 24 years of lies, her mother's death, the case that had drawn her in like gravity, the voice of a man who had looked her in the eyes and said, "You sound just like her." It hadn't been random, none of it. He'd been watching her all along. Where would he go? Sarah asked. Rachel shook her head. He doesn't run, he waits. That's what he does. He makes you come to him. Sarah turned towards the window. Outside, the rain had turned to mist. Somewhere out there, Thomas Mark was still writing the story, and she wasn't going to let him finish it. By dawn, she was on the road. The highway stretched ahead, gray and endless. Every mile felt like a page turning towards something inevitable. She drove west, tracing his old addresses, cross-referencing police databases, prison records, employment files, following the ghost of a man who kept changing his name, but never his methods. Everywhere he went, there were patterns. Abandoned houses rented under aliases, P.O. boxes, letters postmarked in winter. He lived through the mail, through stories, through words. He never called, never left fingerprints, but he always left letters. And then she saw it. Record that didn't belong. A utility bill under one of his oldest aliases, Thomas Marks, in a small town on the edge of Lake Erie. Paid automatically every month. Electricity still active. He'd never really left Ohio. The address was a cabin near the shoreline, surrounded by pine and fog, the kind of place that doesn't show up on GPS until you're standing in front of it. She parked at the edge of the dirt road, the engine ticking softly in the cold. The lake stretched beyond the trees, silver and silent. The cabin sat at the water's edge, its windows dark, the door half open. She stepped out, gun drawn. Each step sank into wet earth. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and old smoke. On the table by the window sat a typewriter, not one, but two. Identical. One clean, one rusted. Between them, a pile of letters neatly stacked, sealed, addressed. Every one of them bore her name. Detective Sarah Calloway Copley, OH. Her breath caught. She picked one up. It was dated next week. She tore it open. Sarah, you came just as I knew you would. You couldn't resist following the trail. It's what I gave you. The hunger, the need to know. You think you're here to arrest me. You're here to finish what she started. A floorboard creaked behind her. She turned. Thomas Miller stood at the far end of the room, the light from the window framing him like a shadow that had learned how to breathe, older now, thinner. But his eyes, her eyes burned the same way. Hello, Sarah. Her gun didn't waver. It's over. He smiled faintly. That's what they always say. You killed people. You destroyed lives. I told the truth, he said calmly. Everyone else just called it murder. She took a step closer. You lied to everyone, to Rachel, to my mother, to me. He tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he'd built years ago and finally had time to admire. I didn't lie, Sarah. I simply let the truth breathe. Your mother didn't die because she was weak. She died because she finally understood what she'd done. She helped me disappear, and when she realized what that meant, she couldn't live with it. Sarah's jaw tightened. You drove her to that. He smiled. No, she drove herself, just like you're doing now. He took a step forward. You and I, we're the same. Two halves of the same design. You chased death because you came from it. Don't, she snapped. You spent your life solving crimes because you were born from one. Stop talking. He kept coming. You wanted to save Rachel. You wanted to bring justice. Look around you. Everything you touch turns into another version of this. She raised the gun higher. One more step and I'll... He laughed softly. You won't shoot me. You can't. You've been chasing this moment since you were a child. You need me. Lightning flickered over the lake. For an instant, his face looked skeletal, ghost-like, her own reflection fractured through time. Then another voice cut through the tension. Sarah? Rachel stood in the doorway, soaked, trembling. She must have followed her. Thomas turned toward her, his tone almost tender. You never could stay away, could you? Let her go, Rachel said. She's not my prisoner. He smiled faintly. She's my heir. Rachel stepped forward, gun in hand. You lost the right to call anyone family. He sighed. Always the dramatist. You never learned that love and death are the same thing. That's why you failed me. The moment hung suspended time, stretching between the three of them like wire about to snap. Then Sarah whispered, he's right about one thing. They both looked at her. She leveled the gun. Her voice was steady now. It has to end with us. Thomas tilted his head, smiling faintly. Then do it. The sound of the shot was deafening. The world went white. For a second there was no sound, just light and silence and the smell of smoke. When it cleared, Thomas staggered backward, clutching his chest. Blood spread across his shirt like a dark bloom. He looked at her not with anger, but pride. I knew you'd find your way, he whispered, then he fell. Sarah stood motionless. The gun still raised, her body trembling, but her eyes dry. Rachel moved to her side, voice shaking. You did what I couldn't. Sarah didn't answer. She just looked down at the man on the floor, the father she'd never known, the ghost she'd chased her whole life and felt nothing but the hollow quiet of inevitability. Outside, the storm began to clear. Light broke over the water. Hours later, the cabin was crawling with police, statements, evidence bags, cameras flashing. But none of it mattered. The headlines would say, cold case killer dead after standoff. They would tell a story that made sense on paper. Only Sarah knew it wasn't the end. Because as they carried his body away, she saw something the others missed, the faint outline of another letter tucked into his coat pocket. She pulled it free. It was addressed not to her, but to Rachel. You can bury me now, but the story isn't finished until she reads what's in the lake. Her stomach twisted. That night, long after the officers had gone, Sarah stood on the shore alone. The lake was calm again. The sky clearing, she waded in slowly, the water freezing around her legs. Something metallic glinted beneath the surface, a small lockbox half buried in silt. She dragged it out, pried it open. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a stack of letters, dozens of them, all written in the same typewriter font. The first one was dated 1999. To my daughter, Sarah. One day, you'll come looking for me. And when you do remember, the story isn't about the crime. It's about who chooses to remember it. Her fingers trembled. There were more letters inside, all addressed to her. Rachel's voice broke behind her. Sarah, what is it? She didn't answer, because deep down she understood what she was holding. It wasn't evidence, it was inheritance. The story her father had written for her line by line, year by year, waiting patiently beneath the water until she was ready to find it. And as she stood there in the pale dawn light, the wind whispering through the trees, she realized the terrible truth. This had never been about solving a case. It had always been about becoming it. The morning after the storm, the lake was glass. The world had gone quiet, as if exhausted from the night before. Detective Sarah Calloway stood ankle-deep in the icy water, the lockbox at her feet, her father's letters spread across the shoreline like pieces of a confession scattered by the wind. Each envelope was marked with a year: 1999, 2005, 2012, 2023. Each one addressed to her, each one waiting. Her fingers trembled as she opened the first. Sarah, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and the silence I built has broken. You were never meant to find me, not yet. Your mother wanted you to grow up believing monsters lived outside the home. She didn't understand that sometimes the monster lives in the blood that made you. Her breath caught. The words were deliberate, calm, and cruelly intimate. She read on. When I left that night, I didn't run because I feared prison. I ran because I feared what you'd become if you knew. Eleanor thought she could save you from me, but she only saved my story. And now you've come to finish it. You always were your mother's daughter, determined, righteous, blind. The pages shook in her hands. She felt sick, but she couldn't stop reading. The second letter was dated 7 years later. Do you ever dream of the fire of the sound before the gun went off? You weren't there, but I think some part of you remembers. Guilt doesn't pass through words, Sarah. It passes through blood. You've been chasing ghosts because they're all you recognize. A gust of wind tore through the trees, scattering the papers. She knelt in the mud, grabbing them one by one, her breath coming fast. The letters felt like fingerprints pressing into her mind, his voice crawling back into her head, even from the grave. Rachel stood a few feet behind her, wrapped in a blanket, silent. The police had long since gone. There was nothing left to process, no evidence that would make sense to anyone but Sarah. Don't read them, Rachel said softly. That's what he wants. Sarah looked up at her. He wrote them for me. That's why you shouldn't. But she did. The third letter was dated 2 months ago. I watched you, Sarah. You at the funeral, standing where the snow fell the same way it did the night I killed him. You have her face, now Eleanor's. You even hold your jaw the same when you're trying not to cry. You'll tell yourself you can stop this cycle, but one day someone will find a body and you'll hear my voice again. Because I am not gone. I am what comes after the sirens fade. The paper slipped from her hand. Her father's words felt like a curse, not one that kills, but one that binds. Rachel took a hesitant step closer. Sarah, listen to me. He spent his life turning people into stories. Don't let him write you into his... Sarah stared at the letters, her pulse steady now, her grief crystallizing into something sharper. He already did. She reached into the lockbox again and pulled out the final envelope, unsealed, unfinished. The ink looked fresh, like it had been written only days before the standoff. There's one truth left, Sarah. When the time comes, go to where it began. The house, the one by the fields. She left something there for you. It will tell you who you really are. Rachel's face went pale. He's lying. Sarah looked at her. He never lied. He just rearranged the truth. By afternoon, she was back in Copley, Ohio. The Miller house still stood boarded hollow, its windows blank and watching. The yellow crime scene tape had long since been torn by wind. Time had eaten away the paint and the roof, but the air still held the same quiet tension it must have the night her mother had walked in to save a woman and buried her life instead. Sarah stepped inside. Dust motes floated through the weak sunlight, cutting across the room. The kitchen floorboards creaked under her boots. She could almost hear the echo of the kettle whistling, the thud of a chair, the gunshot. Every crime leaves a frequency behind a vibration that never really stops, and this house still hummed with it. She followed the hum to the basement door. It groaned open. The air smelled of damp and ash. She descended slowly, flashlight slicing through the dark. In the far corner, half hidden behind an old cabinet, she found a small tin box. Inside were photographs brittle with age, her mother Eleanor standing beside Rachel. Another of her as a child, barely 3, sitting in the arms of a man whose face was turned away. Thomas. And one last picture, a family portrait, faintly burned at the edges. The Millers, Thomas, Rachel, and a child between them. Not her, another girl. She flipped the photo over. The writing on the back was shaky but clear. For Sarah, she took your name so you could have her life. Her knees gave out. The beam of the flashlight shook against the walls. The child in the photograph wasn't her. It was the real Sarah Miller. Her mother hadn't just hidden Rachel. She'd hidden the child. She wasn't Eleanor Calloway's daughter at all. She was Rachel's. Her heart hammered in her chest, her thoughts fracturing under the weight of it. Her entire life, every memory, every truth she'd believed had been built from another woman's lie. Upstairs, the floorboards creaked, a soft sound, footsteps. She rose slowly, gun-drawn voice low. "Who's there?" Silence. Then faintly, the whisper of paper, a single sheet, slipping across the floor. She climbed the stairs. On the kitchen table sat another envelope. No postage, no seal, only her name in that familiar, uneven type. "You found it. You see now. I never wanted to hurt you, Sarah. I wanted to make you understand what love does when it loses itself. You can burn these letters, bury this story, walk away, or you can finish what I started. It's in you. It always was." There was no signature, but the ink was fresh. She looked out the window toward the tree line, the endless white field beyond. A shadow moved there. Then another. For a moment, she thought she saw him, tall, dark coat face obscured by fog. Then he was gone. Rachel's voice echoed in her head. "Don't let him write you into his story." She looked down at the letter, the ink bleeding slightly where a raindrop from her coat sleeve had touched it. The words distorted, curling, fading. She struck a match, watched the flames crawl across the page, eating the past line by line. The smoke filled the room, sweet and acrid, carrying away his voice at last. The house filled with light as the sun broke through the clouds outside. For the first time in 24 years, the air felt still. She stepped out onto the porch, the cold wind stinging her face. In the distance, the lake shimmered under the winter sun. Behind her, the house that had held 1,000 ghosts began to burn, slow, deliberate, like a cleansing. Rachel waited by the car. "Is it over?" she asked. Sarah looked back at the rising smoke. "No," she said quietly, "but it's not his story anymore." She reached into her pocket, pulled out the last unburned letter, the one from her mother, and slipped it into the wind. The paper twirled, once caught a beam of sunlight, and vanished over the trees. Then she turned to Rachel. "Let's go." As they drove away, the fire behind them spread through the field, its glow reflected in the rearview mirror like the final frame of a film finally allowed to end. The cold case that had defined her life was over. But in her chest, beneath the exhaustion and the ache, something new stirred. Not guilt, not vengeance, freedom, and maybe for the first time peace. Yet as the road stretched ahead and the radio crackled to life, one last fragment of static bled through the speaker, faint, distorted, and familiar. A man's voice. Her father's. "Every story needs a narrator, Sarah." Then the signal died. The horizon glowed with fire in the rearview mirror, and the screen of her life finally faded to black.